For me, it's a special privilege to be here at 26 2nd Avenue, knowing what historical significance this place has. This is the first time I'm seeing 26 2nd Avenue without a gas station next door. Like, from one visit to the next. The previous was this old gas station.
They're moving fast.
Yeah, this is... Anyway, it's the Hare Krishna movement, so everything's moving fast. And I like to think of these, what we sometimes call pioneering days of Srila Prabhupada here, and how it all started here, but of course it all started long before Srila Prabhupada acquired this place. And just in the last few days or weeks, I've been receiving these email messages, excerpts. Maybe some of you also get them from Chitra Lekha, I think is her name. She's been posting every day something from Prabhupada's diary, his 1966 diary. And it's really, really kind of touching to read these entries. From each day, Prabhupada would record certain things about the day. One thing he recorded was his accounts. And so he would record that he spent 30 cents for the bus, or that he spent 50 cents for, for butter and for fruit and whatever. And he would record income. Many days it was no income. Some days he would get a donation. Sometimes it was $2, sometimes it was $3. One time I think it was $13. And he's also recording about his books, which he was his main concern in a sense. He had his first canto Bhagavatam in 3 volumes, and he was having them placed in bookshops. The Paragon bookstore, does that still exist? Paragon?
I don't think so.
Doesn't exist anymore?
So.
Oh, okay, that's too bad. Anyway, and he's recording how he's leaving so many sets here. Sometimes he's getting sets back, sometimes sets are sold. And he's also speaking about people who come to visit him. And oftentimes he will note that so-and-so said he would come, but didn't. And so he'll just kind of say, so-and-so did not come today. That's it. It's very kind of abrupt. He's also telling about his correspondence. He's writing to various people in India, trying to get help. He wants to purchase a property in New York, and so he's hoping for some major donors. And he's trying to work out how to get funds out of India, because that was a problem. Anyway, all these details, but it's all knowing what develops afterwards, how the Krishna consciousness movement kind of takes off from 26 2nd Avenue. It's kind of touching to read, I find, to read these details. A little story also I want to share about 26 2nd Avenue I heard from Professor Thomas Hopkins. Thomas Hopkins is a wonderful person who has very deep appreciation of Prabhupada and his movement and his books. And Professor Hopkins had been doing his own doctoral study, I think it was at Yale University, in the early 60s. And he completed his dissertation in 1962, and the subject of his dissertation was the Srimad Bhagavatam. And some years later, he found out about 26 Second Avenue and about Srila Prabhupada, and he came here with a couple of his students, and they walked in the door, and he tells that there was a table with Prabhupada's Bhagavatam on it, and there was one young man here in this room, and Professor Hopkins, we know him as Tom, he says, "Call me Tom." He saw the Bhagavatam and he was amazed and so happy because he knew very well what this book is, and he was also surprised because to his knowledge there were only 2 editions of the Bhagavatam existing in the entire United States in 2 different university libraries. And now he sees this and he's amazed. And he wants to strike up a conversation with the young man who is present. And he says, "So, your guru is from Bengal, yes?" And the young man says, No, he's from India." So Tom knew kind of what was going on, that, poor the Swamiji, who he was dealing with, people who were fairly clueless, but what he was appreciating, this was already more than 2 years ago at this conference at Harvard about ISKCON after 50 years, he was appreciating how far the movement has come since then. Okay, Bhagavad-gita as it is. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Our little invocation, a mantra which is invoking Krishna, and this is also invoking the Lord's presence, you can say, in our effort to hear, to draw nourishment from Bhagavad-gita. Usually this term, the name Bhagavad-gita is translated as the song, Gita, of God. And this helps us to appreciate what we're dealing with. No ordinary song, no Broadway song or hip-hop or whatever. This is Bhagavad-gita, not hip-hop Gita. Yeah, I've been assigned to read from the last of the 18 chapters, chapter 18, and toward the end of the chapter, which means we're coming to sort of the grand finale of Krishna's speaking to Arjuna. As most of you will know, the Bhagavad-gita is a dialogue, or we may want to say it's 18 dialogues. Sambhava is the technical Sanskrit term. And this discussion is going on in a most unusual place for a philosophical or theological discussion to take place, namely on a battlefield, just before a battle, a great battle is about to take place. And the key issue is whether or not Arjuna, the warrior, famous warrior, will fight or not. He is disinclined to fight, but he is also open. He wants to hear from Krishna what he has to say. And now, as the Gita, as it's called for short, is coming to an end, Krishna is going to be saying, so, now I've presented to you arguments, explanations from all different angles of why I'm advising you to take up arms in this battle. So, but it is your decision. And I would say this is going to be a key theme that we can reflect on, the theme of choice. How we as human beings have a choice. We can choose. Well, sometimes it's said we have really only one choice, and that is either to take refuge in Krishna or to take refuge in Krishna's illusory Shakti, his Maya Shakti. Anyway, we'll get there. Let's read the verse, and I see some of you have the book. Others of you might find it on the internet. And I don't know, what is your usual? Do you usually chant the verse together?
More often than not. So it's up to you.
More often than not. Well, I think why not? Here we go. We'll try this. This is verse number 60. Svabhāva-jena kaunteya. Svabhāva-jena kaunteya. Nibaddhaḥ svena karmaṇā. Nibaddhaḥ svena karmaṇā. Kartuṁ necchasi mohāt. Kartuṁ necchasi mohāt. Kariṣyasy avaśo pitat. Kariṣyasy avaśo pitat. Svabhāva-jena kaunteya. Nibaddhaḥ svena karmaṇā. Kartuṁ necchasi mohāt. Kariṣyasy avaśo pitat. Let's go word for word. Svabhāva-jena. Born of your own nature. Kaunteya. O son of Kuntī. Nibaddhaḥ. Conditioned. Svena. By your own. Karmaṇā. Activities. Kartum. To do. Not. Icchasi. You like. Yat. That which. Mohāt. By illusion. Kariṣyasy. You will do. Avaśaḥ. Involuntarily. Api. Even. Tat. That. Translation and a short purport by His Divine Grace. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: under illusion, this is Krishna speaking, under illusion you are now declining to act according to my direction, but compelled by the work born of your own nature, you will act all the same, O son of Kuntī. We do have one more chair right here. If you want to come up, welcome. Purport: if one refuses to act under the direction of the Supreme Lord, then he is compelled to act by the modes in which he is situated. Everyone is under the spell of a particular combination of the modes of nature and is acting in that way. But anyone who voluntarily engages himself under the direction of the Supreme Lord becomes glorious. I want to back up a little bit to get a little context. I would suggest that this verse, 60, kind of goes along together with verses 58 and 59. These three kind of fit together to make a particular point. So, going back to verse 58, Krishna is saying, if you become conscious of me, you will pass over all the obstacles of conditioned life by my grace. If, however, you do not work in such consciousness, but act through false ego, ahankara, not hearing me, you will be lost. Whew, heavy words. And then he says, in verse 59, if you do not act according to my direction and do not fight, then you will be falsely directed. By your nature, you will have to be engaged in warfare. And then verse 60 is really an elaboration on that last point. Under illusion, you're now declining to act according to my direction, but compelled by the work born of your own nature, you will act all the same, O son of Kuntī. So these are rather strong words of Krishna. And he's carrying on with a major theme of the Bhagavad-gita. Right from the beginning, there's a concern about action. Of course, the word is karma in Sanskrit. Karma has become something of a household word, especially in New York City, right? Oh, it's my karma, what to do, and so on. A lot of our understanding of what is karma comes from this book, from Bhagavad-gita. Sometimes it's been explained, what is this idea karma? And one way it's been explained is it's an expression of an understanding that the universe is a moral universe. What does that mean? It means that actions have consequences because of their moral character. And what do we mean by moral character? Something to do with the notion of right and wrong. Something to do with the notion of good and bad, or good and evil. The broader term, we have the word moral, morality in English, and then the broader term we can say is ethics. And ethics is addressing the question, what should I do? You may have noticed in the course of any day of your life that you can remember back to when you were small, you've asked yourself that question. What should I do? Right? And every day, little decisions come up, sometimes bigger decisions, sometimes decisions that we feel are too big for us. And we sometimes wonder how to make a decision, considering that we feel inadequate to know what will be the consequences of our actions. And when I say consequences of our actions, this points to a certain type of ethical reasoning, which is called consequentialism. And as you might guess, consequentialism emphasizes concern for the consequences of one's actions. Now you may think, well, that sounds to me like that would be the only thing to consider when thinking about what to do and what not to do, but it's not that simple. There's another kind of ethical reasoning with another big term, and that is deontology. Deontological ethics is, to put it in simple terms, the impulse, the impetus, or the principle that I act a certain way because it is my duty. I will not know what the consequences are. I cannot know in advance. I don't have my portable crystal ball with me to see what it's going to happen in the future. And however scientifically I might try to approach it, to understand the future, ultimately I cannot know, and therefore I simply have to accept that there is a duty, and then the question is, what is my duty? There's another broad category of ethics that is usually spoken of in the Western tradition, and that is virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is the idea that you're right, we can't know what's going to happen in the future, and just knowing what your duty is may be inadequate to determine how to act. What's really required is to cultivate an inner quality or set of qualities to be a virtuous person. And if I am a virtuous person, I will naturally know what to do in particular circumstances. If we look at Arjuna, his situation in the beginning, where he's, in the first chapter, explaining to Krishna why he doesn't fight, why he doesn't want to fight, we could say he's sounding very much like a consequentialist, because he's saying, if I engage in this battle, it's going to be a very terrible result. There will be so many people killed, and that's going to lead to terrible social consequences, and it's going to be just a devastation on so many levels. So it doesn't make any sense for me to do that. But one could also say, Hare Krishna. Maybe I shouldn't say it. What was that?
I think it landed safely, Maharaj.
Okay. Are we safe?
Whatever it is.
Prabhupada's trying to tell me something. He's saying, get to the point. Surrender to Krishna. Okay. We might also want to say that Arjuna is exhibiting virtue ethics because of his concern, his respect for his elders, and so on. He's actually a virtuous person. And then we start to hear in the second chapter from Krishna, and Krishna seems to be straight deontologist. He's saying, this is your duty, just do your duty, and don't worry about anything else. Well, it's not so simple as that either. We find Krishna making points from many different perspectives, and he's talking about virtue very much throughout the Bhagavad-gita, and one might even want to argue that this becomes the main thrust of what Krishna is speaking in Bhagavad-gita. For example, in the beginning of chapter 16, we get a whole list of what you might want to call virtues before Krishna goes into all the characteristics of the demonic mentality. And then he reassures Arjuna, don't worry, you're one of the good guys. So why is he telling him about the demonic mentality? That would be a point of discussion. But so there are these many different aspects of ethics. But we can say the Bhagavad-gita is very much about ethics. And I want to propose that something is going on here which none of these 3 points quite get to, and that is what I call the ethics of preference, divine preference. Ever since Plato, remember Plato? Long time ago. I don't know if he ever visited 26 2nd Avenue. Maybe one of you were Plato in a previous life. So Plato, or as in Germany they call him Platon, used one of his conversations, one of the dialogues called the Euthyphro dialogue. The question comes up, what about these gods? Because in Greek society tradition there were so many different gods. We might want to call them devas. And they seem to be making demands on human beings. So when they make a demand, how should we understand? Should we understand that because they are divine, therefore whatever they demand or command is good, must be good? Or should we understand it in a different way? Should we understand that what they're saying to us is good because it is already good? It is the goodness is prior to their divinity. Is it good because it's coming from God, or is it good intrinsically? So this becomes a kind of debate, and it becomes what's called the Euthyphro Dilemma. And I want to suggest a way out of the dilemma. Do you want to hear how to get out of this dilemma?
Yes.
Do I have you on the edge of your seats? That's all right, you can sit back.
Can you explain more of the dilemma?
We can go back to it. So I'm saying, I want to say that instead of talking about divine command, God commands, and therefore it is good, or God commands what is good. I'm saying it's neither of these. It's about God's preference. So it's divine preference. God prefers that we act in certain ways. And if we act in certain ways, and that gets us back to what Krishna's saying in these verses, if you act in these ways, you're going to be okay. And if you don't, it's not going to be good for you. Not because God wants to punish, but because it's just going to be a perpetuation of this situation that we're already in. The situation being, in the terminology of the Bhagavad-gita, being subject to the gunas, these modes of nature. If we think in terms of preference, then we can think in terms of bhakti. We can think as we naturally do in this world when we think about our relations with each other, with friends, with with parents, with superiors, what they want and how we can please. And then that helps us to appreciate how a relationship with Krishna might be or could be, and how it could be a pleasing relationship, which is really also what the Bhagavad-gita is so much about. On one level, it's about this terrible situation of a fight, a war, where indeed lives are going to be lost and so on. But on another level, it's about this very amazing relationship between one person, Arjuna, and the Supreme Person, Krishna. And Krishna's explaining that already in the 4th chapter, after Krishna's giving a little bit of autobiography, which goes way back prior to this life, when he's explaining how he's given this teaching to Vivasvan, the sun god, ages ago, and now the same, and then this knowledge was lost, evam parampara praptam, that was received, was lost, and then sa evayam maya tedya yoga prokta puratana bhakto si me sakha cheti rahasyam etaruttamam. I'm telling you this. Why? Because someone may ask, why are you telling this to him? What's special about Arjuna? And Krishna declares, Bhakta asi, you are my Bhakta, my devotee, and Sakha, Sakha means friend or companion, you're my friend. I tell secrets to friends. To my good friend, I'll tell a secret, because the Bhagavad-gita is rahasyam hi etad uttamam. This is the highest rahasya, the highest secret, it says. So that relationship, that's what the Bhagavad-gita is offering to us. Krishna is offering to us, but he's saying you want to get that relationship, it's going to help a lot if you find out what I prefer. What I prefer. And therefore in the middle, is it the 7th and 9th chapter, I always forget, when Krishna's telling us about how we can offer things to him. Patram pushpam, 9:26. There we have it. Patram pushpam palam toyam. You can offer me simple things. Vegetarian, please. Krishna prefers vegetarian food. And so, yeah, Krishna is revealing, is showing what he likes. As in a friendship, we get to know what each other, what our preferences are, and we're interested. We want to know what our friends like, and so on. Okay. Now, however, in these verses, which is coming to this kind of very critical point where Arjuna has to make a choice, it seems like Krishna is speaking in rather grim terms, isn't it? The previous verse, again, if you do not act according to my direction and do not fight, then you will be falsely directed. By your nature, you will have to be engaged in warfare. Under illusion, you are now declining to act according to my direction. Mohāt. Moha means illusion. Mohāt means from illusion or out of illusion. And then kariṣyasy, you will act, this is the future tense. Avaśaḥ, involuntarily, you're going to be forced, you're going to be a warrior, whether you like it or not, because that's what you are. Now this is, I find this, there's a kind of a paradox here in a way. Because it seems like what Krishna's emphasizing here is, you're not going to change yourself. You are what you are, and you're not going to change. And on the other side, he's giving him a choice. And choice suggests freedom, and freedom suggests capacity to change, doesn't it? So we may wonder, which is it? What's this all about? Well, maybe before we go there all the way, I want to back up and think about karma, action, because some time ago I was reading, sometimes for my work I read lots of different things, and I was reading a quite interesting essay by Hannah Arendt. Anybody heard of Hannah Arendt? She was a philosopher in the mid-20th century, German-Swiss, who emigrated to the U.S. I guess it was during or before the war. She was a student of his name just Martin Heidegger. She was a student of Martin Heidegger, who was a very influential philosopher. Anyway, in one of her books, I think it was her book called The Human Condition, she talks about three things: labor, work, and activity. And she makes a distinction between them. And she wants to say, labor is what you do to get a wage to survive. It's not really changing anything when you do labor. You're just you're doing something, exerting yourself, and you're getting some money for it, and sort of life goes on. And the results of labor are not very visible. Then there's work. Work, she identifies as the human activity of creating, for example, building a structure. So that structure is going to last for some time. It's going to be there, and that's going to affect the environment. It's going to affect our lives over a longer period of time. But it's still, in one sense, not very significant. What's significant, she proposes, is action. And what is action? In her scheme, action is what makes a difference. And action is born out of speech. It is human beings speaking with other human beings and considering their situation, and as a result of their considerations, making changes in their lives. And this then brings about real change, real significant. It's significant. It's something that matters. So I was thinking about this and wondering, what is karma in this, if we think about this scheme? And it seems that we might want to then take her scheme and think of it in terms of the modes of nature: tamaguna, rajaguna, and sattvaguna. Whereas we go up from tama to rajas to sattva, then there is more illumination, and there is more, we may want to say, significance to what we do. And this then comes into full blossom when we take shelter of Krishna, And this idea of taking shelter of Krishna sounds like we tend to think, oh, wait, there's no choice there. So how can that be a significant action? But it has been said, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was Cicero, again going back to ancient times, a Latin thinker. Correct me if I'm wrong, all of you classics scholars out there. He said something to the effect, freedom comes in the perception of necessity. And then a couple of millennia later, this was also said by one French philosopher, whose name also I just slipped my mind. But anyway, isn't that interesting to think that freedom occurs where there is a perception of necessity? And what greater necessity than to surrender, to find what is the preference of the Supreme Person and accept it? What greater necessity is there than that? That is the feeling of a bhakta, of a devotee. Did that make any sense? Yes, no, maybe, some of it. A fair amount, okay. 20%, 30%, 40%, anyway. Okay, now, speaking of surrender, we always seem to come to that conclusion because, well, what can we do? That's Krishna's conclusion. I want to read a very short passage that was written in an article in something like 1937 in The Harmonist. And this article did not identify the author. However, I would, my educated guess is that it was written, or at least advised, by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And the subject of his article was, he was responding to Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi had written 10 questions which he had then published. He sent to one newspaper, and the newspaper published it in India. And these 10 questions were challenging the notion of untouchability in India. As some of you may know, in India there has been this sociological phenomenon, if you like, of untouchability, where certain classes or certain persons regard other persons as literally untouchable, not to be engaged with. They are considered to be, by some people they are considered less than human. This has changed in the present to a large extent, but it's not disappeared. One area of industry in India where it has very much at least receded is in the software industry. And the reason for this is that software companies couldn't care less where you come from. If you're a good programmer, you're hired, isn't it? Yeah, so that's an interesting phenomenon. But we're talking about the 1930s, and this was a major issue as India was developing a spirit of wanting to become independent from the British. The independence movement was going quite strong by this time, But this issue of untouchability was a kind of a thorn in the side of the country, and one of the arguments of the British that no, we need to keep ruling over you because you Indians can't take care of yourselves because you have this backward system called untouchability. So Gandhi wrote these challenging questions, and Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, or one of his followers, wrote an article replying to this. And one of the questions in his article had to do with why so-called untouchables were not permitted to enter into temples of the Lord, because that tradition had been there up to this time. And so this article mainly responds to that question. And in the course of his response, he does a very interesting thing. He sort of turns the whole subject upside down, because he says, it's not really about it's not about touchable or untouchable. In fact, in relation to, he refers to Vishnu, Vishnu being the Lord, who the source of whom we understand is Krishna, but Vishnu is sort of a more generic term, if you like, for the Supreme Lord. It's not about touchable, untouchable. It's about whether or not God or Vishnu is accessible. Even if you come in the temple, are you seeing God? Are you seeing Vishnu? And if you are not qualified, then no, you're not actually seeing Vishnu. And if you're making offerings to Vishnu, but you are not in the right mood of surrender, is Vishnu accepting those offerings? He's saying no, he's not accepting. So it's not a question of who can enter the temple. Anyone can enter the temple, but are you qualified to actually approach the Lord? So here's an interesting additional point that he makes. I'll read, it's just a couple of sentences. He says, those who do not wish to worship Vishnu are automatically, notice he says wish, so there's choice. Those who do not wish to worship Vishnu are automatically expelled from the transcendental plane of his worship and find their congenial occupations on this mundane plane. Congenial means whatever fits, whatever is good for you. They are able to practice these occupations by means of their physical bodies and minds, which are given them for this purpose by the deluding potency, and deluding and potency, D and P are both capitalized. They are able to practice these occupations by means of their physical bodies and minds, which are given them for this purpose by the deluding potency. Probably this is referring to what's technically called Maya Shakti, the deluding potency of Vishnu. So some of the phrases here I think are very revealing. First, those who do not wish to worship Vishnu. I do not wish to worship. Okay, then automatic, expelled from the transcendental plane of his worship. So you don't want to worship, so you won't be worshiping. Don't worry. You won't be able to. And does that mean that's the end? You're finished? No. You will find your congenial occupations on this mundane plane. Congenial, something that fits you very nicely, according to your varna, according to your svabhāva, is mentioned in this verse. So it's a matter of preference. If you like, you can worship the Lord. If you don't like, that's okay. You can still be very busy with your physical body, with your mind. And you will be engaged, as it's mentioned in this verse, kariṣyasy, avaśo. Involuntarily, you're going to act. There's going to be no choice in the matter. You will be acting, and it's going to be under the deluding potency. So if you're happy with that, fine. That's the idea. Yeah, this is, I think, expressed in an interesting way. Right, so svabhāva-jena kaunteya, he's addressing the son of Kuntī, he's reminding him, you're the son of Kuntī. Kuntī is a very great queen, and you really, I want you to act in a way which will be pleasing to me. And yeah, for Arjuna this meant he's going to have to fight in this war. Not a pleasant thing. Service to the Lord may not always be pleasant. But the relationship to Krishna will be pleasing. It will be it will be completely rewarding, and it will be ever increasingly unfolding, enriching. It will be ever more satisfying. Yet avadi mamacheta Krishna padaravinde nava rasa damadudyantam rantumasit. Nava rasa means ever fresh, ever new rasa, ever new flavor, taste. It's going to be good. It's not going to be sour. It's going to be sweet. But, as I said, service may sometimes, the service itself may sometimes be a challenge. But if there's no challenge in life, that would also be boring, isn't it? Yeah. All right, I think I'll stop here and see if there's some point of discussion, of question, of doubt, of correction, of clarification, or any of the above, any of the above. Hare Krishna. Yes.
We covered a lot of topics, so there's a lot of questions. I'll try to keep. So, my question, the previous to my question is: you said freedom would indicate that he has some choice. It's not that, like Krishna's saying, on one hand you don't have a choice. Of course, the freedom can also, it seems like freedom could be seen that you do have a choice, but only within the confines of your nature.
Yeah.
So then my question would be, Suja Sambhavan, we're born in Kali Yuga. It's not so easy to identify what is our natures, or rather we may have different impulses coming from what appears to be different natures.
Yeah.
So then how do we practically apply using our nature in Krishna's service if it's not clear what our nature is?
Indeed. This is a wonderful question. Did everyone hear the question? Yeah? Murli Vadaka Prabhu has a nice voice. Thank you. Nice to see you again. This let me a little bit broaden the question to say, how do we find out what is our varna, what is our nature? And to this, I always appreciated one answer given by His Holiness Bir Krishna Goswami, who said, if you find that there's some activity that you can do for 10 or 12 hours or 14 hours a day and not feel tired, that is your nature. Subhangata is saying there's no such thing that
She said sleep.
Sleep. Hare Krishna. Yeah. Yeah, but you said this is this idea, kalo shudra sambhava. We are in this age all sambhava manifest as with this shudra. I like to take this term in a positive sense. We usually kind of go shudra, but think about it this way. Shudra's position is one of service. And if we start from that point, then yes, we can be proud of being Shudra in the sense that it's said that a devotee is proud of the instructions of his or her guru. So one can be proud of being engaged in following those instructions, and then proud in the positive sense. Now, another point about freedom, who was it? Another 20th century philosopher who made a distinction between freedom from and freedom to. We have, in the notion of mukti or moksha, an emphasis on freedom from bondage, freedom from ignorance, and so on. And what we take as the more interesting and significant and really desirable form of freedom in the bhakti paradigm is freedom to serve, freedom to engage in bhakti, freedom to remember Krishna, freedom to sing Hare Krishna. This is a positive freedom. There's a negative and a positive. And so the choice, as we come up through the modes of nature to sattvaguna, our choice becomes greater. Our freedom increases. The more bound we are by tamaguna, the less choice we have. And yet we still have little choice there. We can turn ourselves more and more into a situation of greater freedom. But as you put it, it's always within confines, within the modes of nature, unless we make the leap of faith, as Søren Kierkegaard put it famously. We need to make a certain leap of faith out of the modes of nature. He didn't talk about modes of nature, but we can say out of the modes of nature into transcendence. Does that make any sense? If I had to repeat what I just said, I wouldn't be able to. Something. Yes.
Getting back to what you said about God's preference,
Yeah.
it seems to me that one of the essences of this verse is that our mission in life is to align personal will or personal intention with God's will or God's preference. Is that right?
Yes, that's a nice way to put it. Your name is?
Nikki.
Nikki. So Nikki was saying, it seems to be that if we think about purpose, we may think in terms of aligning our will with the will of God. Yes, that's a nice way of putting it, and this kind of resonates with a lot of what we hear in yoga philosophy, physical alignment of the body and so on. It's very important. And here we have the word icchasi. Iccha means something like, it can mean something like will. More broadly can mean desire, but it's sometimes connected with the will of God. But this idea of divine will sometimes gets a little scary, and it gets associated with this idea of command, God's command. And then if you don't obey the command of God, you are condemned to hell for all eternity, sort of a thing, which doesn't really... This idea, I don't find resonates with the whole approach of the Vedic tradition. Now, there is a statement, two statements in the 16th chapter, toward the end, where Krishna does sound pretty strongly like that, sort of like, if you don't do this, you're going to hell, not just for one life, but life after life. And that becomes quite stern, you could say. Maybe I can find it. However, even there, I would say it's very much a matter of preference. Yes. Those who are envious and mischievous, who are the lowest among men, I perpetually cast into the ocean of material existence, into various demoniac species of life. But notice here what he's saying. It's not, I don't cast, Krishna's not saying I cast you because you deny my command. He says those who are envious, dvishata, those who are envious of other beings, I don't like that, Krishna says, so you're going to suffer for that. Attaining repeated birth amongst species of demoniac life, O son of Kuntī, such persons can never approach me. Gradually they sink down to the most abominable type of existence. But they never it's never said they are eternally damned. It's could be a very long time, but it never says forever and ever and ever and ever.
Well, never could be interpreted to that, right?
Our understanding of the evolution of the living entity through the different species of life.
They may work up, yeah.
Once they're condemned to a low species of life, then isn't it that they just automatically now will begin to progress?
Yeah, that's the general understanding. That's always a little mysterious. I don't really want to experiment myself with that. See if that works. Yeah. Yes?
So in the verse, so Krishna says, under illusion, you are now declining to act under my direction. So I was just wondering if you can comment on sort of the context or the timing or the order in which Krishna, why does Krishna makes that statement here? Because in previous places in the Bhagavad-gita, Arjuna indicated to Krishna that he was going to surrender, that please accept me as your master. So I just wonder if you comment on this.
Yeah, it's a conversation, it's a dialogue, and dialogues are not always in perfect sort of what we may think is a logical order. Now, you may want to counter, well, but this is God himself. Certainly he's going to be perfectly. But he's not bound to that. If he wants to, he may. I would say the entire Bhagavad-gita is a kind of circling around of the whole issue. And so Krishna is making points from all different angles. And then here he's kind of backing off and saying, look, come on, Arjuna, you do want to make this decision right, don't you? It's almost, and sometimes he seems to be almost pleading with Krishna, with Arjuna, please do the right thing. And of course we can also say that he's spelling it out, not just for Arjuna, but for us. Maybe Arjuna got it right already, but maybe we didn't get it right yet. So maybe he's talking to Arjuna, but over there is Duryodhana, And he's saying, he's looking at Duryodhana, and if you don't surrender to me, expect trouble. Yeah. Yes.
Might there be some frustration between this, you spoke of this deluding principle of Krishna, and an aspiring devotee's level of, or their perceived level of surrender, and some frustration around that? Can you address that? I don't know if I'm articulating it properly.
Let me guess, you have felt such frustration?
You might say that.
Might say that. Okay. The question is about if I can say something about the frustration that one might feel, I would say in the transition, where we're not there, we're not totally ensconced, absorbed in the deluding potency maybe, but then again we're also not out free yet. And we're in that betwixt and between stage, right? And sometimes we may feel ourselves going upward and outward and in the right direction, and sometimes before we know it, we've stumbled and we're falling back, and what did I do wrong? Was it me? Is it the weather? Is it what is going on here? Well, if it's any reassurance, it may not be, but Krishna does explain, again, I don't remember 14th or 17th chapter, but he's talking about the three modes of nature in both chapters. And let me see if I can remember. Rajas tamas chabibhuya sattvam bhavati bharata. Rajas sattvam tamas chaiva tamas sattvam rajastata. I got it. Aren't you impressed? No. So he's saying that the modes are sort of constantly shifting, modes of nature. And I always find it interesting to make a little comparison of this with the Chinese Taoist notion of yin-yang, these, the shape yin-yang. And that symbol, you'll remember probably, it's usually in sort of opposing colors, black and white. And in the center of the largest portion area of each of them, yin and yang, is a bindu, a dot. And the idea of that, one explanation is that the potential, as soon as the full unfolding of the one of these two principles is manifest, the opposite principle starts to then take over. It comes back out. And so it's always this. And this idea is also there with the modes of nature, something like this. In that verse from Bhagavad-gita, Krishna's explaining. And so we're dealing with something of an ocean of these modes, these shifting energies. And we can feel them sometimes just in the course of a day. In the early morning you may feel more clear, more luminous. Of course, some people don't. They get up in the morning and there's no clarity for some people until what is the time now? 7:30 in the evening. Anyway, but in general, we might say, for most people, the early morning is a good time for clarity. Then you come toward the midday and you're feeling more rajasic energy, and then evening time, maybe I don't want to say ignorance, but there's another word I want here, but something else comes. Inertia, a sense of inertia comes, maybe. So that's going on. And one of the difficulties as we are trying in our progress in spiritual life is we may be working against ourselves by being too hasty in judging ourselves for our shortcomings. And what happens is sometimes our judgment of our shortcomings makes us forget our strengths. And then it gets into a kind of vicious circle of pulling us down. And then it can become very challenging how to, spring back up and say, okay, whatever, let me serve, let me do something for Krishna, let me surrender. But also that negative judgment of ourselves can lead to all kinds of troubles, like becoming judgmental of others. And then that can be a very dangerous spiral of what's called Vaishnava aparadha, where we start to too hastily judge what we perceive as the shortcoming of another, when actually the shortcoming may be in ourselves. Because we don't see the trajectory of the other's life. From our perspective, we may not know that, this person is actually doing very well, and okay, they have this aspect, but it's just marks on the moon. It's not an issue. Okay, that's a few thoughts to that.
Very encouraging.
Thank you. Yes.
From personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
In order for us to actually leave this world, we should be loving Krishna. We have to develop a love for Krishna.
Mm.
And of course, it's supposed to go through the process of devotional service, and it's going to happen. However, presently, we still want to love Krishna, but then we're looking at that. We want to. I want to.
Yes.
I want to. But then looking at the suffering that happened to so many living beings,
Mm.
There is a question: does it have to be so bad? I mean, Krishna is the creator. The way this world is the way He wanted it to be.
Mm.
So the thoughts are: why so much suffering? Why so much suffering?
Why is there so much suffering?
Yeah. So it's and you like question Krishna, why? Why so much
Yeah.
pain? What exactly the spiritual soul's done so bad? I mean, I know it's understood that we're torn away from the Lord at some point, but does it have to be like such a severe suffering of living beings, such a prolonged suffering?
Mm. I'm asking the same question. This is a question that has haunted human society since practically time immemorial. Does it have to be so terrible? Why does it, and why? And indeed, of course, as you said yourself, we answer that suffering is the result of karma. And we still want to say, does it have to be that bad? And furthermore, we may want to ask, are we learning the lessons that are meant to be learned, if indeed that's what it's all about, is learning lessons? if the suffering is meant for teaching us, okay, I won't do that anymore. But if we're not remembering what it is that we did wrong in the past, if people if the vast majority of people don't even have a sense of what what we're calling the law of karma, then what is this all about? These are taxing mysteries. But this would be my point, that and this was put very nicely by one author. We find ourselves always in a situation where we experience something of certainty. There is something immediate to our experience about which we feel some certainty, a degree of certainty. But that, from that certainty, it fades out, it extends out into increasing areas of uncertainty, and then that goes off, so to say, out to the edge of what we may call mystery. And that is human life, that we are conscious. This is not something you're going to read in Bhagavad-gita, although I would say it's hinted at by the word rahasya. Rahasya means secret. It can also mean something like mystery. Rajavidya, rajaguhyam. Guhya means that which is enclosed, which is hidden. So there's always a dimension of reality in this world which is hidden from our sight, which we cannot comprehend. And all we can do in this situation of incomplete knowledge is make this leap I was mentioning, this leap of faith. But it's a leap in knowledge. Based on what we know, it is actually in knowledge. And therefore Krishna says, Rajavidya, it is the king of knowledge. It can also be translated as knowledge for kings. So if you get this knowledge in a deep sense, you can become yourself effective in your life. You can, in a sense, become like a ruler, a king, a queen, by mastering this understanding of the knowledge of faith, the necessity to surrender, as I mentioned before. Freedom is awareness of necessity. Did that make any sense? No, not much.
It is difficult. I'm not even talking about only humans. I'm talking about animals.
Yes.
What's happening to them.
Yes.
It's very hard even to...
The whole world is running on biological violence. And that's mentioned in the Bhagavatam. Jivo jivasya jivanam. Palguni tatra mahatam. Jivo jivasya jivanam. Every living entity is food for another living entity. That's the harsh reality. But we get another vision, and that vision is the vision of Vrindavan, where everyone is there. It's not jivo jivasya jivanam. All the living beings, all the animals. It's mentioned even the wild, so-called predator animals are not predators in Vrindavan. But why is it like that? Because Krishna is there. Because they all acknowledge Krishna. Yeah. Yes, Murli Bhattacharya.
When the question was asked, I thought it was asked to the perfect person to answer. I really appreciated your answer to that question. My question follows this: Is it how do you say, hard-hearted or too simplistic to give an analogy like this? So your little 3-year-old is at the beach making sandcastles. it's time to eat lunch, it's time to take his medicine. So you go over, you gotta stop making your sandcastles, you gotta do something else. No, it's my sandcastle, I can't, no, you can't. So finally, the parent just steps on the sandcastle. Now the child starts crying, and the child is suffering from that crying. But from the parent's perspective, how significant is it? So my question is it too hard-hearted to say the suffering that we have in this material world because of our attachments to that which is not real is not that significant in one sense? Or,
No, that could be a way of putting it. Krishna is kicking down our sandcastles.
Even though from our point of view, I mean, the horror that we see is the horror my father saw in World War II, even though he was raised as an Orthodox Jew. He gave up religion completely.
Yeah.
The rabbi couldn't say, why did God allow that kind of horror?
Yeah.
So it's there. But I'm trying to see it through the eyes of the Vedic understanding.
Yeah. But it's still somehow incomprehensible, isn't it? I think we have to admit that. I personally don't feel happy when I hear the sort of dismissive response to this. Well, it's just karma. No. Well, yeah, but it is painful. We have to also acknowledge the horror, as you say, and the pain. And if we take religion in the broadest sense, I don't like to think of Vaishnavism as in a sectarian way. I think if we appreciate, for example, Jesus as a Vaishnava, then we see how we learn from him also. This is emphasized. In the Christian traditions, they're always talking about suffering. Sometimes you think too much. But actually there's a deep insight there. The idea of acceptance, even embracing of suffering. There's something there. And it's also mysterious, as the Christians will be the first to say. Right, time is rolling on, and I think it's time for...
Oh, wonderful. Kirtan.
So I will... Anyway, I will say thank you now very much for your very patient attention, and I hope there was some food for thought for all of you. And Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Bhagavad-gita as it is ki jai, Gaur Premanande. Hare Krishna.